pollsters and political geeks, the year after a presidential election is very weird. That's because there are so few big elections. No Senate races, no House, almost no governors. This time on Poll Hub, our new poll of one of the only races in 2021 that people are really paying attention to, the New York City mayoral contest. It's big not only because New York is America's biggest city and no other mayor in the US has a bigger stage, but this year New York City has adopted something called ranked choice voting. It's the biggest test of this new system of voting, and it's not only potentially confusing to voters, it is confounding for pollsters. We're going to talk about that. There's a lot to dig in on this, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Lee Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
So New York City mayor's races, we've been polling for, about 100 years. What was the first New York City mayor race that we, I wasn't here, but that you guys polled?
1989, the time that David Dinkins beat Rudy Giuliani and became the first Black mayor in New York City.
So fast forward a lot of years, and we have a new poll that we did with our partners at WNBC and Telemundo 47 and POLITICO of the New York City mayor's race. And this one is really unusual for a whole bunch of reasons. Let's start, can we start with ranked choice voting and maybe just explain that real quickly? Because it really does set the table for everything we're going to talk about. This is not a normal election, right?
Well, if you can explain ranked choice voting real quickly, you're a better
Yeah,
man
I
than
was about to say, to give an elevator pitch for ranked choice voting is a really tall order.
Give it a try.
But in the past, New York City had traditional elections for mayor. If there was a large field of candidates, and there are actually 13 candidates running for mayor on the Democratic side this time, and another 2 on the Republican side, who will meet up in the general election. And in a multi-candidate field, there was a threshold. The candidate had to get at least 40%. Otherwise, the city would have to run another election on another date and have a runoff between the top 2 candidates.
Which happens in a lot of places. We saw that recently in Georgia, for instance, in the Senate race. Different threshold, but the same idea.
Mm-hmm. So what ranked choice voting tries to do is give voters an opportunity to actually vote for the candidate that they like the most, regardless of where that candidate may fall in the polls or how far ahead or behind they think they are. And then voters get to choose more than just that candidate when they walk into the voting booth. I think the easiest way to explain ranked choice voting is kind of to verbally describe what people are going to be looking at once they go into the voting booth. They're going to have 13 candidates along the rows on the left-hand side of their ballot. And then across the top, they're going to have 5 preferences labeled literally 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's kind of, bingo. Would that be a good way of explaining it?
But it's first choice, second choice, third choice, fourth choice, and fifth choice.
You've got to line up your row with the right choice that you want to make. And so some people will walk into the ballot, will fill out their ballot, I should say, because not everybody's walking into a voting booth anymore. There is actually early voting in New York City, which started actually a number of days ago.
Last Saturday, I believe.
Yeah, and so when they're looking, looking at the ballot, they may just choose one and be done. We found that 2 candidates, Eric Adams, who is somewhat ahead in our latest poll, and Andrew Yang, their supporters are those most likely to just be one and done and move on. But most voters are actually going to go through all the different preferences and pick more than one candidate, likely 2, 3, or 4. And there's actually probably a quarter of voters that are going to actually choose 5 ballots.
And so what happens then is when they count it, that's the other tricky part, is that if whoever gets the least number of votes in the first round, those votes are tossed out, right, for that person. But the second choice of the voters who voted for that person who's now gone, that second choice votes get added to the people who are still in. And that goes through as many as 12 rounds. That would be the maximum rounds for 13 candidates, until you get two people, the last two standing. So this additive thing makes it difficult to understand for voters, but the polling, it makes polling really hard. So Lee, normally we'd say Eric Adams is ahead because he gets 24% of the vote, and Catherine Garcia is second, she gets 17% of the vote. But that's not what we said this time, because we can't say that, right?
Yeah, well, before just a hair before we get into like how this compounds polling, am I correct in saying that if there was a candidate who had bigger support, started at 46%, you don't go 13, 12 rounds, and it's only, in other words, because the people you're knocking out at the beginning and for the first several rounds, most rounds have like 1 or 2%. So that doesn't kick anybody over, because the top vote getter right now is in the 20s. So to get to 50, it's going to go multiple rounds, although it doesn't have to, because
Well, hang on. Don't just say kicked out too, because it sounds like we're now taking away votes. And the whole point of ranked choice voting is if you vote for a candidate that didn't win and actually was pretty far down in the bottom, you now get to kind of quote vote again, if that makes sense, because you have
get a second choice.
You get a second choice. And if that second choice has been kicked out, you then have the third choice, which will be counted. And so you can actually, your vote is more likely to count towards determining who the mayor is going to be than just if you had voted for one candidate.
Well, if I get a lousy bingo card and I pick 5 people of these 13, and they finish 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th in the actual voting, what happened to me? Do I count?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because if you pick the 12th candidate second, because there's 13 candidates, so one would have been, so that would be the second round. Then your next choice counts.
But in the end, if you get all the rounds, you end up with 2 candidates. There's no guarantee that I picked one of those at all.
That's absolutely true.
So I'm a loser.
But that's no different than in a 4-way race, Lee. That's no different. I mean, that hasn't changed. So anyway, what are the numbers? What did we find in this poll? And also, first, what did we find in the poll? And then how did we calculate this? Because you can't just say who the first choice is of people, because nobody's winning on the first round. So we had to do a lot more. We worked with an organization called Fair Vote, who understands this stuff and has some algorithms built around this. Let's talk about that. What did we find, and how did we get there?
Yes, they are actually ranked choice vote advocates. They don't advocate any one particular candidate, but they do advocate for this method of voting and believe that it is more representative and is a way to allow people to have more options. However, it's not going to feel that way after Election Day or on Election Day, because the only thing that will be released at that point is everyone's first choice. So it's going to look very similar to a traditional Election Day, and then the other preferences have to be calculated.
And what did we find for the first choice?
When we looked at first choice, Eric Adams, the Brooklyn Borough president, was ahead with 24%. Catherine Garcia had 17%. And Maya Wiley had 15%, and Andrew Yang had 13%. We then jumped pretty far down to the next person, who was Scott Stringer, who had 7%. And then the rest of the candidates were in low single
including
digits.
The wonderfully named Paperboy Love Prince.
I know, that was
I needed to say his name once in the podcast, so we can go on.
Isn't he our guest next week when he wins the?
Probably not. So that's the first choice, and normally, Barb, that would be the end of the story. Now we'd be talking about crosstabs and all that. But this isn't the end of the story.
But think about that. So you have candidates that are getting just, about a quarter to a fifth of the vote. That's a long way from the original 40% threshold that we would have had in a previous mayor election, and a really long way from the 50% threshold that is required to win the primary this time. So yeah, there are a lot of rounds. So what happens is the 13th candidate, who I think was Aaron Foldenauer, with 0.1%. So he was the first candidate to be dropped off, and then we went on to the second round. We continued that through, actually, it took us 12 rounds. We didn't really see a lot of changes in the upper tier candidates until we got to around 10. Not around 10, to round 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the end, Eric Adams maintained his lead and got 56% to Catherine Garcia's 44% in the final 12th round, which was the point at which he ended up going over 50%.
It's very important.
Talk about the uncertainty here, because
took the word right out of my mouth.
Exactly.
So the next sentence has to talk about polls are always estimates within a margin of error taken at the time. Important for the time that they're taken. Campaigns don't stop because we do a poll; they continue. In fact, they went to a debate Wednesday night long after we were actually doing the interviews. So uncertainty is a thing that we live with as a certain, we always have survey estimates. This time there's compounded by the fact that the behavior, as we've been talking about, people may be one and done, they may go 2, they may go as many as 5 rounds, and we have to talk about that. And each round is a separate statistical event. So by the time we get to someone getting over
round
50,
12, yeah,
round 12. This is reminding me of the Ali Frazier fight, the second one that went 12 rounds, and one was standing at the end, but he was kind of bruised and battered. So I mean, I don't know if we're kind of going down that same road, so you get to the end round, and normally a 50, whatever it is, to 40, there was a big gap, 12 points between Adams and Garcia. That would be something we would have quite a bit of confidence in as a big lead. It doesn't count for as much now because of the uncertainty. We don't know what the turnout's going to be. It's 13 candidates. It's the first time New York City's had a June primary for mayor as opposed to a September primary. And, that's added into the whole mix of what are people actually going to do when they are looking at the ballot that has the opportunity to go 5 choices, and will they? I think what the ranked, the fair vote people have found is that as you get closer to primary or election day, people start increasing the number of rounds because they start learning more about the candidates and they become more connected to it. And this is, I will end by saying, a poll is this is a subset of a subset of a subset. So these are likely Democratic primary voters, of whom, if we get 20% turnout, that'll be a break with precedent, because that'll be more than we've had in quite a few primary days.
And that's one, Lee, that's one of the arguments that some of the campaigns are making. I mean, one, do we think that it's fair that it's being characterized as any of these top 4 could win? That's probably a fair characterization.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The other thing that some of the campaigns, especially Andrew Yang's campaign, is arguing, because in this particular poll, the first choice, he's in 4th place, but again, anybody, could clearly win this, is that the electorate will be different this time for all the reasons you just stated, Lee. It's just an unprecedented election. And so the electorate's not going to look anything like it has in the past. And I want to hone in on one thing. We used to say, in covering politics and all races in New York City, and this is true all over the country, but in New York City in particular, we knew who the prime voters were in primaries. They were older, especially older women on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. That was a prime voting bloc. There were African-American older women, prime up in Harlem, out in parts of Brooklyn. And then there were union members because the union endorsements mattered so much. And that's how you got a coalition together when 6 or 7% of the electorate turned out in a Democratic primary. Is there anything to suggest that those prime voting groups hold anymore in this particular year?
Well, yes and no. They are
Well, there's a
clearly-
poll answer for you.
No, because yes, because they are still more likely to show up. They are what is kind of called habitual primary voters. So if you look at the proportion of people who have voted in previous mayoralty elections, the likelihood is you need to kind of give them a little bit more weight, because more of them are going to show up proportionally than they represented among Democrats as a whole. However, we've had a couple of really interesting elections. We've had the general elections of off-year election during Trump's term in 2018, and then the general election in 2020, where there was enormous voter registration. A lot of people are now registered to vote, and that's who we were talking to. We were talking to registered Democrats. So our poll certainly has taken that into account. I know the Yang campaign has been suggesting, oh no, it's also different, if you're looking at prime voters. But we don't just look at prime voters. We give them a little more emphasis, but we are also looking at the fact that there are a lot of new people who may have never voted in a mayoralty election who are going to show up this time.
But talk just a second about, there was some pushback because of, there wasn't a separate heading for Asian American voters in the release. Can you talk just a second about why we include subgroups and why other groups are not included in the release, not necessarily in the poll?
Yeah, we include white, black, and Latino. And there were people who said, oh, so you didn't poll Asians.
Right. And so we release and we characterize the results of all the questions, not just the toss-up, but all the questions by a number of different subgroups, which we refer to as the cross tabulation, which means you're just cutting the sample, you're looking at a particular group and seeing how they answer. We require a minimum of 100 interviews unweighted, which means we actually need to speak with at least 100 people from any one subgroup in order to release it. What does that mean, and why do we do that? It's because statistically we want to have confidence that our numbers are representing the opinions of that group of individuals. And the proportion of Asian Democrats in New York City does not meet that threshold. We do speak with them, but there are only approximately between 5 and 6% in New York City. And so if we're doing a sample of between 800 and 1,000, you can see we're not getting to that threshold of 100 interviews. The same thing is for Staten Island. And, it always
people said we didn't poll Staten Island. Yeah.
We always poll Staten Island, but it's only 3% of the Democratic primary. So again, we wouldn't meet that 100 unweighted interviews.
Yeah, so bottom line, folks in Staten Island and Asian Americans in New York City are included in these final totals.
Absolutely.
They're just not pulled out because we would be misrepresenting the views of that group if we did that. So actually
we can't talk about the whole group just based on that small.
Well, I'm sure
at least without any statistical confidence.
Yeah, Jay, you look like you wanted to make a point here before I go to my fun fact.
No. I do want to make a point before you go to your fun fact, because we talked about ranked choice voting. I just want to step back for one more second, and I know Mary's rolling her eyes and giving me the
No. She gave the rap 2 minutes ago.
She's actually not. This time she's not.
We talk about ranked choice voting as being difficult for people to do or confounding voters. And I think it's really important to mention the fact that in our poll, Democrats in New York City actually feel very prepared
likely
to-
Democratic primary voters in New York City.
Well, but Lee, no, yes, that's true, but it's also the more closely people are following the campaign, the more likely they are to feel prepared. And we know there's a relationship between people who follow the campaign and then end up voting. So I think, Jay, you mentioned fair vote as well. And I did ask them, so what's normal? If you're looking at a poll, what's normal? How many people go in and say that they're just going to vote for one candidate and move on? And usually that's about a third of the voting electorate, 33 to 35%. We got 26%
lower.
of New York City voters to say that they were only going to vote for one candidate. And interestingly, Fair Vote said that actually declines on on primary day or on, when people fill out the ballot. So I think it's actually a testament to New York City voters that they do feel prepared. They're following this campaign closely, and they are likely to vote for a lot of candidates.
And Lee, real quick, just let's point out that ranked choice voting is not, New York isn't the first place to do it. It's used statewide in Maine and a couple other places. It's used in lots of states for a variety of other things. So this is just the biggest group of potential voters. There's 8.3 or 4 million people in New York City, obviously not all voters, but this is the biggest place it is used in terms of the population it is being used, but it has been used in the U.S. for some time,
and coming all the way to Alaska for the Senate race next time.
Right, exactly. So I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, it's in 50 cities approximately around the country. So this discussion is maybe a method of voting that's coming to a city in your neighborhood and not too long. And as you know, Jay, as you indicate, this is a national phenomenon. And there's another national phenomena. These segues are just absolutely well-crafted.
Painful.
The best segues are the ones you don't call out as a segue, Lee. So just do it with confidence. Just do it.
Well, anyway, I have to have a good fun fact, because after Steve Thoma's hot dog performance last week, there's been some interest in having Thoma time each week as opposed to my time. But keep those cards and letters coming in, folks. You're really encouraging me. Anyway, it is Father's Day on Sunday. How's that for an indisputable fact? And in I looked at it now again in 2015. Yes, 2015, CBS did a national survey, and they want to know, well, what makes for the best Father's Day present? And what I thought is, I was somewhat surprised by this. The plurality answer, the biggest answer, 37%, were tools. I suspect
it's kind of the male version of a vacuum cleaner. I mean, what does that mean?
Well, I also think today you'd have categories that might include like different computer and communication devices, not just a hammer and a nail.
It was only 2015. It wasn't 1955.
I know that, but tools, I don't know. Anyway, next was sports tickets.
Okay, that I could see.
So
that one you're on board for, Lee.
Yes, that's one. That would
you don't use so many tools, but sports tickets you'd be good with. Yeah.
Yes, and then the thing I use the least, books at 18%. I do accept Yankee books about the Yankees and the New York Football Giants, and that's it. And then ties, and that's not a tie.
Those are going to be those are really going to be out this year, because nobody wants to go back to dressing like an adult, either at home or at the office.
Even people going back to the office. I'm guessing the dress code is going to be different.
I have a closet full of suits. My cleaners doesn't even recognize me anymore when I go in there.
Huge trend right now. Huge trend that people are looking for clothing that are kind of business casual, so that we can all stay somewhat comfortable as those of us who have to return to the office do so.
Yeah. So, and so that's, we'll see what happens as people unwrap these and see if the trends this year are any different. Before we go, did we introduce Ashley Marshanak last week or not? I can't remember. Ashley Nod, our current, no, we did not. Do you want to go off mute? I know we didn't rehearse this, but so Ashley, tell us just in one or two sentences, because now Mary's eyes are starting to roll a little bit.
Who are you and
your
why
major,
are you
where
here?
you're from, and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, so my name's Ashley. I am a junior at Marist. I'm a political science major with a paralegal certificate, and
you're joining us because
I started after doing the CDC internship with you guys. I did the
college to career, yeah.
Yeah, I started working on the newsfeed team with you guys. So yeah,
And so
you got rid of Amelia.
Yeah.
She's now actually in the real world making money, which is a good thing. So you've sat in on two. This is I think your second podcast. In one word, how would you describe what you have observed or reacted to?
Fun. I know it's more than one word now, but I find it really fun. I really enjoy it, and it's very interesting.
Well, continuing in her role, helping out with the podcast, will be Ashley Marcinak because of the answer to that last question. So thank you very much.
Right off the top.
No, it's great to have you.
Welcome,
I hope it's fun for the entire time you're with us.
And stay off mute so you can do what we all do here, which is to wish everybody, all our dads, happy Father's Day, right? So happy Father's Day, everybody.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith, and Poll Hub's executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor, and Marcello Bettman is our trusted editor. Thanks, of course, to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And don't forget to check out our short series of online learning modules. They can be found on maristpoll.com. The Marist Poll Academy is where we give you the 101 on polls, methodology, and so much more. Oh yeah, and it's free. Of course, if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe.